and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Mr. Modi, he has been on a tear lately, making a lot of trips abroad, cementing his already well-established relationships with heads of state, and to know more about his recent accomplishments from his recent trip to Japan, and as well as the new quadrilateral relationship that is evolving between India, United States, Japan, and Australia, let us reach out to Professor D Nalapat, who was in Japan and is currently in Taiwan. Professor Nalapat, welcome to P Guru's channel.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you were in Tokyo for a few days, and now you've come to Taipei. What do you make of this new relationship or the new alignment that is taking place, Professor Nalapat?
Well, yes, I was in Tokyo. In fact, coincidentally, I was staying in the same hotel as the Prime Minister around the same dates. It was entirely coincidental that that happened. I would like to say that Shinzo Abe has delivered for his good friend Narendra Modi in terms of that $75 billion currency swap. I think that is, if it is used properly by the finance ministry, and that's a very big if it's used if it's made good use of by the Reserve Bank in perception management. I'd like to say so far the perception management Reserve Bank has been favoring foreign funds, vulture funds who want to come and basically feed off India rather than feed into India. Well, if these two things happen, I think Shinzo Abe would have done a great service to the future of the Indian economy by increasing this currency swap from 50 billion to 75 billion dollars. Prime Minister Modi can would have gone back with a smile because of that particular decision that both the leaders took.
Now, so it's a 50% increase in the rupee yen swap, and that's a significant number because that kind of gives them a little bit of cushion should the rupee again should there be a run on the rupee, which I think it has taken a pause thanks to your efforts and probably P Guru's efforts about highlighting the engineered crisis that was happening. What do you make of it? Do you think the rupee has stabilized around 73 now? Will you see do you see it appreciating back up?
Look, there are a group of people working within India who are linked to people outside India who want to be basically like vultures. Vultures feed off dead meat, and these people want to see the death of growth in the Indian economy for them to prosper. Unfortunately, many of them are still in high positions inside the government, inside both the monetary authorities as well as the fiscal authorities, as well as in the broader government, as well as, of course, in the opposition parties. So, frankly, I would like to say that until there's a thorough cleanup of the supporters of what I call the insider vulture cabal, we cannot be confident that the rupee will find its true value, which Prime Minister Modi, his supporters correctly identified before 2014 as around rupees 40 to the dollar.
Well, I think this is something that's not going to happen immediately, but hopefully, see, you and I may not be privy to some of the steps that is happening in the background to try and curb this menace. Let us hope that Mr. Modi realizes it. And I just want to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk to you a little bit about the quadrilateral agreement, or I wouldn't say agreement, but some sort of a debate that is going on or an alignment that is going on between India, United States, Japan, and Australia. What can you share about that, Professor Nalapat?
Well, I'd like to say that, in my view, the risk of war between the United States and China is now finite and, in fact, is increasing. And this is a very, very new development that has taken place over the last 2 or 3 years. So there is a definite risk of an armed conflict between the US and China. Whether the conflict can be contained to a particular zone or contained to a particular level of intensity is something that we cannot predict at any point in time because war has a logic of its own. But definitely there is a risk of conflict. In that situation, India is now a member of the Quadrilateral Alliance, which basically means the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. Now, these four countries are democracies, and these four countries are working together in for certain goals. One of the goals is that there should definitely be Indian primacy over the Indian Ocean, and this primacy can only come if India is strongly supported by the United States. So, in other words, it's got to be a joint Indo-US primacy over the Indian Ocean and a joint US, Japan, Philippines, Vietnam, Australia primacy over the Pacific Ocean. So the Pacific and the Indian Ocean are the two oceans that come together to form the Indo-Pacific. An alliance of the United States with India in the Indian Ocean segment, and an alliance with India, of course, and an alliance of the two countries with Japan, with Australia, with Philippines, with Vietnam is, in my view, essential to ensure primacy of within the Indo-Pacific.
Could you please clarify something for me, Professor Nalapat? For the longest time, Vietnam was under Chinese occupation. Now, do you think that now it has come out of that and it has gravitated fully towards the United States?
I'd like to say that Vietnam, yes, was temporarily under foreign occupation, but the reality of the situation is that the Vietnamese are an immensely proud, nationalistic, and strong people. I mean, there are people who have not been defeated by any invader, frankly. As lately as, I mean, you saw how the French took a complete pounding in Vietnam. And I'm sorry
Yes,
to say, Sri, your country,
yes,
the United States, made
yes.
a huge mistake in supporting the French colonialists against the Vietnamese freedom fighters. And that is how the US was sucked into the Vietnam quagmire that was so costly for the US in terms of its prestige. But the reality situation is Vietnam is a very proud country, and I don't believe the Vietnamese will ever allow themselves to be subsumed by any other power. Vietnam and India have been close for a very long time. During the time when the United States was clobbering Vietnam, and frankly, Henry Kissinger has killed hundreds of thousands of people in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and yet he got the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know if he got the Nobel Peace Prize for peace or for population control. You'll have to ask the Nobel Committee about that. But the reality of the situation is that the US and Vietnam are now coming together because the Vietnamese do not want uh, any one country to dominate the Asian landmass or the Eurasian landmass. Now, if you remember, in the previous centuries, the UK had a policy of not allowing any continental power to dominate the European landmass. I think India it would be well advised to go through a policy of ensuring that its diplomacy prevents any any power from dominating the Eurasian landmass. Because if you dominate the Eurasian landmass, you dominate the world.
One side note for viewers, there is a movie called The Post, which just aired on Netflix and HBO and perhaps also on Amazon, I'm not sure. It is being streamed. If you get a chance, do watch it because it talks about US's misadventure in Vietnam. It's an excellent film. It talks about, this is the story of Washington Post and its lady proprietor, Catherine Graham. A wonderful, worth watching movie. Professor Nalapat, um, now, I had a question in my mind. Let me just collect my thoughts here.
Remind me of a question. I'd like to point out that I'm an admirer of the Washington Post, but I must say that I mean, over this Khashoggi matter, for example, they seem to be painting Khashoggi as some kind of a saint, and this is the mistake that the West always does. They painted Osama bin Laden at one time as a saint, and now, of course, I'm not comparing Khashoggi with bin Laden, but the fact is the man was a fanatic Wahhabi, and he was no saint.
Uh, thank you, Professor Nalapart, for that clarification. Um, now, I if there has to be a conflict, and I'm just gathering my thoughts here, that there's supposed to be a G20 meeting where Trump and Xi are supposed to meet, and there is still some going back and forth happening for that meeting. Trump has also threatened to impose more trade restrictions. Now, for the longest time, the US stock market was doing fine, whereas the Shanghai stock market was taking a beating because of this trade conflict. But if you look at the US stock market, October has not been a good month. In fact, the United States has given up all its gains for this year. Maybe some of the chickens are coming home to roost. Now, what kind of a time frame do you see before there's going to be actual conflict on this, Professor Nalapat, between US and China?
I'd like to say, Sri, that the reason why the United States is now in a situation where it is the increasing tensions with China is the fact that the China under Xi Jinping is very steadily consolidating its power in new technologies and in the 21st century, in the future. So long as China was not really technologically able to take on the US, it was fine if it grew economically. It was a kind of a harmless giant. But today, the Chinese are now learning to master artificial intelligence. And if you talk about 5G technology, I mean, in my view, Huawei will be able to challenge any US, European, or other competitor in 5G. In India, for example, which is a very huge 5G market, I mean, Huawei would probably offer much better commercial terms than any of its competitors. So, in these new technologies today, China is no longer a dependent power. It's an independent country. And of course, a lot of its products, a lot of its technology, according to various reports, come from various sources in various ways. But the reality is, the United States technological dominance of the world, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Amazons, they can be challenged by Chinese companies. And in my view, Chinese companies may look to India. Today, India is virtually, I mean, the a protectorate of Amazon, of Google, of Microsoft, of Facebook, of Twitter. Now, if Chinese companies who offer the same services come, and they may be able to compete with these American giants. So the reality of the situation is war is always started not for, I mean, reasons of ego, or although newspaper writers may say that, it started for very fundamental reasons. And the fundamental situation is today China is catching up technologically with the United States. And according to the Trump administration's understanding of the situation, they have very little time in which to ensure that this is rolled back. I think, in that point of view, Mike Pence's speech at the Hudson Institute was equivalent to Winston Churchill's speech at Fulton, Missouri. I think it was a very, very important speech. And in my view, frankly, I mean, I think a country that Mike Pence needs to visit as early as possible is India.
Let's hope that visit happens because this is the first time someone is mooting this kind of a trip. But I think you have very good reasons for saying that, and India and US are actually now partners in this quadrilateral agreement. So let's hope that happens, and that at the end of the day, both India and the US benefit. Thank you very much, Professor Nalapat.
Thank you. Thank you.